Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Let's Talk HR. Let's Talk HR is the newest addition to the Let's Talk Business South Carolina network of B2B talk shows. As always, I am your host, Rick Jenkins. I am glad you found us. Let's Talk HR. It is produced in conjunction with HTI, or Human Technologies Incorporated. This guy right here is Herb Dew. He is the founder and the CEO of HTI. Herb, I'll get to you in just a second. We're also produced in conjunction with GSHRM. That is the Greenville Society for Human Resource Management. And I'll be talking to the president of GSHRM. And that is Courtney Goforth, and she's going to join us here in just a little bit, so hang tight for that. But first, we're going to get to this guy right here, Herb Dew. HTI provides industrial staffing and professional recruiting services. It also provides a wide variety of human resource solutions. Herb, welcome to the show.
Hi, good to be here. Excited about our first episode.
Man, I am too, and you joined me not too long ago when we had some conversation about HR stuff, and we're going to touch on one of those topics that we did a little bit. What I want to do is I want to talk about three, and I'm going to call them emerging trends. And I just want to kind of tee you up, and I want to get your thoughts on three trends. One of them is the changing dynamics in the workplace, the changing generational dynamics. What we're talking about is boomers retiring in mass numbers.
Yes.
Being replaced with folks in part from a millennial generation, a Gen Z generation, and that means that they look different, and they've always looked different, and they might act different, but they've always acted different. But you know what the real deal is that they want different things out of their job, right?
Yep, totally. So baby boomers, 30% reduction in baby boomers in the workforce since 2021. So we've had a stunning drop. It really accelerated retirements through that period. And then you saw a lot of secondary incomes leave the workforce, right? So you had a lot of wives or spouses that decided to drop out, and they're all coming back at the same time as well. So you've got this combination of things where the workforce has all of a sudden really become younger, like faster than normal, because we had so many boomers leave the workforce, and you've got a lot of kids entering the workforce right now, coming out of college or repurposing over into another job. So it's an exciting time, but it requires many different things from an HR function.
Nowadays, it looks a little different. And you told me a statistic that blew me away about the percent of people today, a younger generation, that have decided they don't want kids. And it all is part of this just wanting different things in life.
Yeah, 44% of kids or couples between 25 and 35 had decided they'll never have kids. So what that means is they're going to be two-income families. They're going to be financially strong, and they're going to want flexibility to travel and do things. So companies are going to have to shift gears a little bit. And we're seeing that pressure, for example, on PTO policies. You know, the days of giving 2 weeks of vacation per year are beginning to fall into you got to give 3 weeks or maybe even 4 weeks at some point, more of a European model.
So let's move on to emerging trend number 2, and that is artificial intelligence. And some of you are saying, dude, that's not emerging. We've had that for a while. That is true. However, over the course of the last year or so, more and more companies and more industries are beginning to use artificial intelligence in the recruitment process.
Right.
Let me give you one statistic here. In SHRM's 2024 Talent Trends Report, and I'm reading, it says only 1 in 4 companies are using artificial intelligence to support HR-related tasks, but that stat is growing quickly. So what are you seeing out there? Are people still trying to get used to this, or are people really starting to go after it?
Well, I think like anything else, I think the younger generations are really comfortable with that and adopting that at a very high rate. And I think, you know, older Americans that are in the workforce are just trying to sort of learn it, right? It's interesting. The other day I had a situation where I had a person who's getting ready to interview for a very technical job, and he was struggling to be prepared for that job. I said, well, let's get on ChatGPT and let's ask them, what are the 5 questions you're likely to be asked? And it came back and produced these 5 questions that were amazingly good for this very technical discipline that he could then be prepared to have as an answer. And he called me after he had the interview and said, heard they asked like 3 of those 5 questions.
Isn't that amazing?
I mean, isn't that amazing? So I think HR functions, it's going to help a lot in talent acquisition, but I also think it's going to help out with little things like, you know, having help writing something that you send out to all the employees, you know, making sure it's not misspelled or it's presented in a sensitive way. So I mean, I know at HTI, we're all of our departments are using it heavily. And I would say year over year, we're probably 30% committed into AI in all of our groups. And that'll go up by the end of the year.
Good stuff. Let's move on to emerging trend number 3. Now, this is emerging in a way, but we're talking about a controversial topic here, folks. We're talking about DEI right now, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Over the past decade, I would say, companies have really begun to invest in DEI within their organizations, whether that be in the form of training, or just making it part of corporate goals or that type of things.
Right.
But as we know, there's been a lot of change here over the last few weeks regarding it. As a matter of fact, DEI efforts at the federal level have at least been paused. We're not sure exactly where all that's going to go, but we do know that we're heading down a road that we've not been to before.
Right.
What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think right now, I mean, the word DEI has been politicized. So when we use the word, it evokes an emotion. You know, it's interesting. Nikki Haley, I was just at a luncheon where she was speaking at, and this question came up with her, and she was talking about DEI nationally. And one of the things she was talking about was she likened that CEOs should look at Dolly Parton as a model for how they should show up with their customers and employees. And her point was that everybody loved Dolly Parton, but nobody knew what Dolly Parton stood for politically. And so I think what companies have to do is how do we, a good company should want all of their employees to feel at home and comfortable. So if we keep that premise of anybody that comes into our workforce, whether they're black or white, whether they're male or female, whether they're straight or trans, whatever it happens to be, is the person capable of being comfortable in the workplace? But I think maybe being careful about sort of the politics of that and what leadership does to sort of advance the voice of the company. I think you'll see some changes in that regard, because I think maybe there was an overcompensation on that on the part of a lot of companies over the last 10 years. And I think you'll see that maybe cycle back a little bit to stay true to its purpose, which is, if we hire somebody, how can we make them feel welcome and heard?
Yeah.
I want all my employees to feel comfortable.
That's right.
And so I'll put my political views forward because of that. So yeah, I think that's what you'll see happen more.
That's really good stuff. Now, you're not going to go anywhere. We're going to take a quick 60-second break, folks. But when we come back, Herb's going to be here. We're going to be joined by Jay Silvers. Jay is an attorney at Ogletree Deakins, and Jay and Herb and I are going to talk about a couple of legal battles that have been raging for the past year or so. One of those, of course, is about non-compete clauses in employer contracts, and the other one is about some exempt, non-exempt status and how some of that might change as the year goes on. But anyway, don't go anywhere. We'll be back.
I bet you want a website that drums up business. You see, every business wants to have an effective online presence that helps their business grow. We guide you through our process that will drive results by clarifying your message with a beautiful design that's strategically optimized for search. Stop wasting your time and money on an ineffective website and let us help you drum up business by designing a website that speaks to your audience and delivers results.
Welcome back, everyone, to Let's Talk HR. As I said at the beginning, Let's Talk HR is the newest addition to the Let's Talk Business South Carolina network of B2B talk shows. As always, I'm your host, Rick Jenkins. I'm glad you found us. Herb Dew, who is the CEO and founder of HTI, is still with us, and now we are joined by Jay Silvers. Jay is an attorney with the law firm Ogletree Deakins. Now, Ogletree Deakins, big law firm, 59 offices, 31 states, doing business throughout the country. This guy, Jay, you work out of the Greenville office. Is that correct?
I work out of the Greenville office. That's right.
I want to talk to you about two things basically today. These are two big legal battles that have been going on for a while. I think both of them started back in April of last year. Both of them, there was some regulation that came down. Both of them were overturned in August or September of last year. And I want to get your thoughts on where we're going to go from here. And I want to start with the non-compete clauses in employer contracts. Now, as I said, I think it was in April that FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission, passed a ruling to prevent non-complete clauses in employer contracts. Now, that's a big deal. That was a huge deal, and I know that because I have had them my entire life, and I know that's a big deal. First of all, tell us about how it started.
Yeah. So the FTC, as you can imagine, it changes with administrations. And the last administration really concerned about protecting employees. This administration will see what's going to happen. So the FTC gets involved and says, you know what? I think we're going to get involved with the non-competes. And South Carolina employers aren't really restricted that much from a regulatory or statutory standpoint with non-competes. Other states, they are. California, you can't have non-competes. So the FTC gets involved and says, you know what? We're going to pass this rule. And they did it.
Yeah. Herb, how often do you talk to folks where this is a real issue, whether that be employees or employers on the opposite side of it?
I mean, frequently. I mean, all of my employees are covered by non-competes.
Yeah.
So it's not unusual to have those. And, some are just protecting confidential information. Some are more restrictive and protecting customers and that sort of thing.
Right.
But this is a conversation. I'm glad we have Jay here because this is a conversation point that comes up an awful lot. And they ask me, and I'm not an attorney as Jay is, but what to do about their non-competes, what's happening with their non-competes. I think they're concerned about there not being any structure so that somebody can take trade secrets and move somewhere else and take those trade secrets with them. So yeah, I think there's a lot of conversation still about what's going to happen with this.
So at your company, how many employees you have?
180 internally.
So you've got 180 employees, and all of them, or at least most of them, I'm assuming, depending on maybe the job they're in, have a non-compete clause in there.
They do.
If all of a sudden, and it doesn't look like that it probably will go through, but we'll get to that in 1 second. If all of a sudden you had to remove those, how much consternation, sir, would that cause you?
Well, it would probably cause me more consternation with my sales group and
Yes.
people that are
that's
sort of, developing customers, the rest of the employees. I mean, we've always been pretty good about if somebody's going to leave, we're not going to stand in their way. And you have to be careful with non-competes. I guess Jay would admit to this. I mean, in our case, our non-competes are not very restrictive. They're just protecting our customers for a period of time, or like 1 year. So we're not stopping them from working in their industry.
Right. Regardless, it got overturned. It got overturned in August or September. One, why was it overturned? And two, what are the chances that it be overturned again?
Well, it was overturned because the district court in Texas, so you don't have this rulemaking. You don't have the authority, FTC, to do this. This is not within your purview to pass this kind of law or this kind of rule. So it was overturned. And they also said some of the evidence that the FTC relied upon was not good evidence. It was bad evidence to even say that we needed this.
Gotcha. Let's move on to the second legal battle we talked about, and is the reclassification of exempt and non-exempt employees. The ruling, I'm going to read this here to make sure I get it right. It said higher salary thresholds that employers would be required to pay employees to maintain overtime exempt status. However, the rule again also struck down. Before we get into it though, just make sure that we all know the difference in an exempt and a non-exempt employee, sir.
That's a great thing, Rick. So most people think, I'm salary, I'm non-exempt.
Yes.
Well, that's not necessarily the case. You have to pass certain tests to be exempt or non-exempt.
There's several questions you answer, and if you answer them this way, it determines.
That's exactly right. And so when you're not exempt, you're not subject to overtime. And when you're exempt, so if you're non-exempt, you can work 75,000 hours in a week,
Yep.
and you're still gonna get paid your salary.
The original Department of Labor ruling, what did it say?
It said it was going to go for executive, administrative, and professional employees. They were going to take it from basically $38,000 a year to $54,000 a year. And then they were going to take the highly compensated employee from $107,000 a year to $154,000 a year, something like that.
Yep.
So it's going to make a big difference for a lot of people as to whether they want to get overtime or not.
Right. And why was it struck down?
It was struck down because the court said, listen, you guys don't have the right to do this. You didn't go through the proper steps procedurally, and you have some data that is incorrect as well. So the court said, no.
And have you noticed trends of companies that are moving from one to the other, trying to reclassify?
So I know in our case, if we had to implement the $53,000 threshold, because we have an awful lot of people that are paid variably. If you're recruiters or you're sales reps, you have a low base, but you have a really high upside on variable. But they were only, that exemption was based on your salary, as I recall. So we probably had 50 employees we might have to reclassify as overtime eligible. That should not be. They're in roles that they would not be normally.
Yep, I hear you. Jay, what are the chances that either one of these come to fruition, either the way they were originally structured or in some other alternative way?
I think over time, especially with the exempt, non-exempt, it's going to go up. Is it going to up in the next 4 years? I don't think so.
Yeah, understood. Folks, that is Jay Silvers. He is an attorney with Ogletree Deakins. Jay, appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Don't want you to go anywhere, though. I'm getting ready to have a conversation, or I'm going to show you a conversation that I had recently with Courtney Goforth. Courtney is the president at GSHRM, which is the Greenville Society of Human Resource Management, and they are a partner on this show. So check out this conversation that I had with Courtney, and when we come back, Jay will be gone, Herb will be here, and we will be joined by Mike Mansuetti. A lot of you know Mike. He is the longtime executive with Bosch. Worked there, I believe, for more than 3 decades, 35, 36 years. He's retired now. We're pulling him back in from retirement to see what he has to say. We'll be right back. And now, folks, I am joined by Courtney Goforth. Courtney is the president at GSHRM, or the Greenville Society for Human Resource Management. Courtney, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. We're happy to be here.
Yeah, it is good to have you, and it's good to see you. I want to talk about a few things about GSHRM, but before we do anything, why don't you give me that elevator speech? Tell us a little bit about the organization and yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you for the kind introduction. Again, Courtney Goforth, and I'm the current president of Greenville SHRM, or GSHRM as we affectionately call it. We've been around in the upstate since the early 60s, actually, as a professional organization. And we're really dedicated to advancing the human resource profession here in our greater Greenville area, which of course has grown tremendously since we were started as a chapter back in the early 60s. So our goal is really to provide HR professionals, business leaders, business owners in the community with education, resources, and networking opportunities.
Got it. You've got a couple conferences, Courtney, that are coming up pretty soon. One, you've got the local GSHRM conference, and you've also got the annual South Carolina conference coming up not too far. Tell us when they are, and let's start with the GSHRM conference.
Yes, we are so excited this year to be hosting our conference right here in the upstate in downtown Greenville at the One Center on April 23rd and 24th. Our theme this year is the 80s, so our conference tagline is Back to the Future of HR, Rockin' the 80s, Powering Tomorrow. So we're bringing the fun and leg warmers and hairspray and all that kind of great stuff while focusing on future HR topics like AI, legal and compliance issues. Of course, talent's always a hot topic, and leadership skills as well. So we're really excited to have a ton of fun with a great theme, as well as really be looking ahead into the future. And that's open now for registration and available for anyone who would like to join us. You do not have to be a member to attend, but we would certainly love to have you join as a member as well. So that's coming up in April for those in the upstate market. And then the South Carolina State Conference for SHRM is going to be in September. So that'll be September 24th and 24th through the 26th, in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So go ahead and save the date for that. Registration will be open for that soon. Also a fantastic theme there of the 70s. So it's called HR Staying Alive in 2025. And it's also the conference's 30th anniversary. So ton of fun, ton of HR learnings, and some opportunities throughout the year for, again, HR professionals, business leaders, business owners to get educated throughout the state.
I'm going to get you out of here on this, Courtney. Let's talk about opportunities for our HR executives out there to get a little bit of training. What's on your calendar?
So for Greenville SHRM, our schedule typically offers monthly luncheons. So you can find us almost every month having an education session, typically that first week of the month. Coming up next month, we've got a great panel on HR really being a strategic powerhouse and a strategic partner to business leaders, business owners, CEOs. So for us, that's going to be a panel discussion with CEOs, HR professionals, and others in the industry to kind of really learn how does an HR person get in there and kind of fill that strategic business partner role, not just the compliance and payroll and some of those things that are also important, but also being on that business side. So that's a great opportunity for us coming up, but really check back with us every month almost of the year. We're hosting an education session over our lunch, and many of our fellow other chapters across the state. So there's 14 South Carolina SHRM chapter affiliates wherever you're located, and they host very similar events and on pretty regular schedules as well to constantly have that education and recertification opportunity out there.
Well, I learned something. I didn't realize there were 14 chapters of SHRM in South Carolina, so that's a nice piece of trivia. Courtney, I appreciate you joining us. All right, folks, let's get back to the studio with Herb Duke. Herb remains with me. Herb, CEO at HTI, founder and CEO, but now I am joined by Mike Mansuetti. Now, a lot of you know Mike. I have heard of Mike and known of Mike for years and years and years, but I had never met him until he walked into the studio just a little bit ago. Mike Mansuetti, he is the retired CEO at Bosch North America. I believe you were with Bosch, sir, for 36 years. You ran that organization for 12 years, I think. It is good to have you. Thanks for joining.
Well, thank you, Rick. It's nice to meet you, and it's great to be back in South Carolina. As you said, I've spent the last 12 years up in Detroit.
Yeah.
Glad to be back, especially after, the warm weather now, and spring is starting to come.
That's right.
It's still a little cold in Detroit, but we're glad to be back here, and glad to be back engaged with the upstate of South Carolina.
I want to talk about the importance of HR departments and HR executives in terms of the way they contribute to a company's overall success, their strategy, their growth strategies, and this type of thing. A recent statistic, 60% of business leaders see HR's role as largely administrative and support staff. About half of CEOs say that their CHRO, of course, their chief HR officer, is not a key player in enterprise strategy. Those statistics seem to suggest that HR is just not at equal footing with the other executives.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's not surprising because I think many people see that way. But I would actually ask those CEOs who answered in that way is, how is your business doing? Yeah. If people are your most important asset, then why is your HR business partner and your HR partner not at the table involved in the strategic enterprise running of the company? In my experience, I found it extremely valuable. And in fact, I wouldn't even have known what to do without my HR partner at the side. And that was both in a plant environment. I had the opportunity to run the Anderson plant for many years, and also at the corporate level in Detroit running our North American organization. They were vital to our importance.
Herb, you founded and run a human resources solutions company, right? Yep. You have the ear of HR execs. Do you feel that they feel undervalued?
Oh, no question. It's for every Mike Mansuetti out there who's a CEO who utilizes their HR people as peers. There's, 2 or 3 CEOs who they're just, HR is just handling the problems. I just don't want to hear about people problems. Yeah. So I think what we have to do is have CEOs continue to evolve and pulling HR people into the conversation. And I think also what we have to do then as HR professionals is step up and use our voice and not be afraid of that, right? And allow ourselves to be relegated to being administrators. So I think it's a two-sided solution, right?
Let's stick with kind of the stereotype of the HR executive for a second. Mike, back to you. You, as a boss of a huge company, you had a COO, you had a chief operating officer. I'm making an assumption, okay? You had a chief technical officer. You had a chief revenue officer or a sales lead. You had a chief marketing officer, so forth and so on, right? And then you have an HR person. Right. That person's responsibility is supporting those other folks. Sure. Administratively, and also finding them workers, right? How did your people feel about this person who was in charge of administrative duties and hiring, and they are my peer? How did you make all that work?
Well, I think first it starts with you and your relationship with your HR leader, your HR business partner. For the last 12 years, him and I saw eye to eye, and I would actually talk with him every day. And then I think the rest of the organization values that relationship that you have as a leader with the HR organization and sees the importance. I also tried to drive the importance with our other leaders, with our business unit leaders, of how vitally important it was that HR had a seat at the table. So, and to make sure that that happens, you have to have the right HR model in place. And again, like I said, there's a lot of people issues and organizational and administrative issues that has to be handled. And there's a lot of experts in the HR community that do that. And then the HR, what we call them business partners. And I think that's also had something to do with it. I mean, they were seen as a business partner. They weren't HR, right? If we only left quality in the organization up to the quality department, where would we be? For me, it was just, I couldn't imagine running the business without a strong HR partner.
Herb, what makes a good HR executive?
Well, what I see most often is them not being capable of being strategic. So that they came up through the ranks transactionally. So they're good at benefits or compensation, or they're good at the legal side of that. But they've never had exposure really to having a voice in sort of the bigger picture thing. So I would say, not that they can't do it, but they've just not been in an environment which they were really included. I think you're going to see in some of these younger generation HR leaders that are strong and bold and willing to step up and have a voice, but also can do the administrative things. Because listen, at least half of HR is administrative, right? Not administrative as in clerical, but it's making sure I's are dotted and T's are crossed, right? Because you're protecting the company in those areas. But it shouldn't be 95% of your job. It should be, 50, 60%. And then 50, 60% of your job should be coming alongside the business leaders and being part of the vision of how you grow.
Right. I could see that would be easily doable in a large company where you have more resources, but a small company, their HR executive, I could also see that they could be inundated with logistics of doing the day-to-day job, and then it becomes a little more difficult, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had a rather large HR organization, and so we had the luxury of, the HR leaders and, working on the system and not just in the system. So, in a smaller company, I think it's also the role of the CEO or the leader is to mentor these folks too, to help them. Again, if they're not involved in the business side, it's easy to get lost in those details. Because again, there's an overwhelming amount of work that needs to be done in all sizes of the organization. But I think the more you get them engaged, and the more they can see really how the business works, not only from a product point of view or a service point of view or whatever you're delivering, understanding the customer, understanding their pain points, how are we really driving these business results, and what does the organization need to do to achieve those results and that excellence that you're expecting, then that's where you can really maximize, I think, their performance. They feel involved, they feel engaged, they're driving others. That becomes contagious, and then you have a wonderful culture that achieves great success, and it's actually a really fun place to work.
I'm going to get you both out of here on this. I want to talk about is, we head down the road. Things are changing. We've been talking about it in this episode today. Things are changing at lightning speed, whether it be technology or what have you, right? What does the future HR exec, and Herb, I'll start with you. What does the future HR executive need to look like? What skills must they have to be successful in the business in the coming decades?
I think they have to be nimble. I think things are changing so rapidly. I think they have to not be afraid of change and embrace that. So I would say those are two sort of qualities that would be super important. I would also say, they've got to be capable of multitasking really well and understanding, okay, we're going to get and delegate the stuff that's sort of transactional and as a professional, keep themselves on the business side of the business, really out in the field, understanding how the business progresses and becoming an invaluable tool to the CEO or the leader of that organization.
I think HR professionals need to remain, true to their core, so they really understand the fundamentals. But I think, those HR professionals, as they develop more towards a partner, back to Herb's nimble point of view, I think the ability to adapt. So adaptability to me is very important, and knowing how and when to adapt. And the other thing I see a need for in not only HR but all the other leadership positions is this ability to lead through change, not just manage change, but really lead through the change process, because change is coming faster than ever, and it's not going to slow down. And again, at the end of the day, all these organizations or these enterprises are based on people, right? People naturally resist change. You have to have, a good change management philosophy, being able to lead through change, and a good process to deal with change in order to be successful, not only today, but also in the future.
Great stuff. Mike, appreciate you.
Thank you.
It was good meeting. Herb, thanks, man.
You got it.
Folks, that concludes episode number 1 of Let's Talk HR. And of course, it is produced in conjunction with Herb Dew here and his group over at HTR, Human Technologies Incorporated, as well as GSHRM, the Greenville Society for Human Resource Management. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.